This whole thing came about is an article, 3 guys made $3 million in 3 years. What they had done is they started an advertising agency. And I started doing it, and I was very successful selling these things. I was still in high school. I made in commissions about $6,000 a month my senior year in high school, and then my first month about $10,000 a month. My primary motivation was to get financial security for my parents. They didn't even have a home when I came out here.
This is a billboard of Julia Reagan. You've probably already seen them around.
And why does she have a million billboards with her face on them?
The billboards read, "In loving memory of Julia Reagan, our loving wife, mother, and grandmother."
So who exactly was Julia Reagan?
Got married 3 weeks after you met.
We ended up at the bus station late. She made the joke, "Oh, let's go to San Francisco." Okay, but we better stop in Reno and get married.
You haven't really known life without her.
Never. Really. I mean, when I'd be building the signs in the summertime, she'd bring my lunch out to me. The longest I had ever lived alone was 3 months before she died.
Utah has the #1 economic outlook in the country, 17 years running. It's consistently ranked in the top 10 places to live, and people are moving here in droves. Yet most people dismiss Utah as ski slopes, religious stereotypes, and awkward reality TV. This podcast pulls back the curtain on the Utah hidden in plain sight, the untold stories behind our most iconic businesses and our incredible entrepreneurial spirit. Whether you're a local searching for your next favorite spot, an entrepreneur searching for hard-won wisdom, or you're just Utah curious, these are the stories you won't hear anywhere else. This is UtahPreneur. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Keaton.
Yeah. So we're in your headquarters just north of downtown Salt Lake City. We're in your room. It has this very distinct vibe. How long have you had this office for?
We broke ground on Christmas Eve of 1985.
Wow.
And moved in on August the 1st, 1986. So what's that, 38 years?
Wow. And for those who are listening and not watching, he's got these amazing paintings, tons of books, pictures of his kids. And of course, we have the replica memorial billboards of your wife, Julia, here behind us as well. So fun that you have them in the office. But you were talking about right before we got on the podcast here, how you love seeing her face every day when you drive to work, right?
Yes, that's really why I did it.
Wow.
You know, I didn't want to really, because she died so unexpectedly, I never really had a chance to say goodbye. I kissed her goodnight and at the hospital, and our home is 5 minutes from the hospital, and I just went home to get 2-3 hours sleep. I told the nurses I'd be back up at 6, and unfortunately then they tried to call me at 5:30 to tell me that it had a code blue, and I rushed up there, but when I got there she was deceased.
You said you met and got married 3 weeks after you met, right?
Right. A friend of mine took me to a party. I met her at the party, and we had a date. First date was at Weber State College for the snowball formal, and we met Thanksgiving weekend, the Sunday of Thanksgiving weekend, and then saw each other and had this intense romance of seeing each other and going out every Saturday. Christmas Day, we had a date, and we ended up at the bus station late, and she had gone to school in California, and they were calling out names of cities. San Francisco came up, and she made the joke, "Oh, let's go to San Francisco." Okay, but we better stop in Reno and get married, or your father will cut my head off when I come back. Yeah, and maybe something else. So it was the case that he was a physician. We ended up at the bus station because we had been parked in their driveway after dinner. We'd gone to the Hotel Utah Sky Room, which was a beautiful place. And being at Christmas Day, it was open because it was a hotel. And we'd been there, and we both ordered liver and onions for dinner.
Delicious.
Strange, on dates. But we both had liver and onions for dinner and ended up going back to the house, and we were in the car and making out, basically.
All right.
And he came out to shovel snow. And so we decided, we drove away. And that's really probably how we ended up getting married the next day, is he came out to shovel snow. And my wife, Julia, told me later it's the first time he'd ever shoveled snow in his life because he was an ear, nose, and throat physician, and he was so worried about his hands always being skin smooth and nothing wrong with them. So it was funny. That's what we thought was the humor of the whole thing.
So that's what got you to the bus stop late and then got you
Yeah,
to Reno.
we just went down to get something to eat,
Okay.
again, and
Yeah.
something to drink, and
Amazing.
then eventually we just ended up. And I told her if we got past the airport on North Temple, I wasn't going to turn around, and she said fine. And
The rest
we
is
drove
history.
all night and got married the next day. So we go over to City Hall. The courthouse was only open that day for 1 hour. And we got there, and I said, "Oh dear, we missed it. We're going to have to wait till tomorrow. It's only open from 11 to 12, and it's 3 minutes of 12 or so." She says, "No, we haven't missed it because we gained an hour." Remember, I went to school in California, so we were standing there. So I thought it was closed because it was closed still because it was 3 minutes of 11 and not 3 minutes of 12.
Yeah.
And so we went in and got married.
And what year was this that you got married?
We got married in 65.
And that was the same year you started Reagan.
Yes. I started Reagan in March of 65, and we got married on December 26th of 65.
Wow. So she was with you the whole way.
Pretty much, yes.
Wow.
I maybe had about 60 small signs up at that time.
Okay.
One contract from the Ramada in Ogden. It was a 5-year contract for $18 a month. That doesn't cover enough time for an employee to go out and clean the face off of one today.
Yeah. How did that first one come about? What was the story leading up to it, and how did you get the first contract?
I called on them and made a proposal to them. And
Billboard was already there.
They were just opening up
Okay.
to put up 10 billboards, Interstate 80, the Mountain Road, which is an 89, and Scotch light it. In those days, you'd put up a lot of Scotch light because the headlights would hit the sign and the become luminescent.
So it was Ramada that
Right.
they were setting up inns, and you said,
They built a Ramada Inn in Ogden, and I developed a rapport with the manager and the architect who had designed it, kind of had done it all, because he was also in charge of handling the opening and that. They would sign a contract, I would go out. And in those days, you could go out and just get locations. It was just before Highway Beautification Act, where
okay.
Today I could not have done that. I could have done it somewhat, but I wouldn't have been able to build the ones in the desert out in Mills Junction and places like that.
I see.
Because the Highway Beautification Act restricts you from placing any signs in agricultural areas.
I see. So this is the first one you placed, but you had some experience in the billboard industry
Yes,
beforehand.
what
right?
happened is that how this whole thing came about is an article that I read in Fortune magazine. 3 guys made $3 million in 3 years. What they had done is they started an advertising agency, and then they were one of the first companies to go public as an advertising agency. And I read about how they'd done this in the advertising business, and I always kind of enjoyed advertising. So I put that together, and there was a fellow in town, had a company called Hard Advertising. So I went to see him, but that was the article was about advertising agency business.
Yeah.
So I went up and talked to him and about advertising and how you start an advertising agency and so on. And I was intrigued, and it turned out that he was in the outdoor advertising business. And he talked me into trying to sell a vision that he had of a vacation land map. And that it was the size of the inside posters you used to see in the movie theaters of the coming movies. It was called a 3-sheet poster panel. I said, okay, and I started doing it, and I was very successful selling these things. I was still in high school.
Yeah.
I'd never intended to do any selling. All my life I was going to be a doctor.
And where were you putting the 3 sheets?
Places where people would communicate, and so the customers were predominantly chambers of commerce. And we would change. We had a map called a vacation land map on it, and then we would change the current events on it for them on a regular, like every 2 weeks. We'd go around to them all and change the current events. So the people that would do it would be like chambers of commerces of smaller communities,
Yeah.
and hotels and motels that wanted to have something that they could tell people and attract people to.
Sure.
People would see it and then come over to it and then maybe go into their restaurant.
Yeah.
So I made what would be equivalent today in commissions about $6,000 a month. My April of my senior year in high school,
Wow.
May, and then my first month out, I made what would be equivalent to about $10,000 a month in commissions. And
Not bad for a rookie.
yeah,
So cool.
just I remember the first customer was a hotel called the Erie Hotel in Sandusky, Ohio, and that was the start of it all.
Wow.
So I had a scholarship to a school called Western Reserve. Today it's called Case Western Reserve. I decided, well, I don't think I'm going to do this. I'm just going to stay here and do this job with this fellow.
Yeah.
But my mother said, no, read the book Death of a Salesman, and if you don't want to turn down a scholarship like that, and you'll end up getting drafted if you don't do that. I said,
Okay.
well, I dropped out of college, got a job with a billboard company in Cleveland then the following summer. I didn't go back to Mr. Hart, but I just happened to get this job in Cleveland. And so I went to work for Packer, P-A-C-K-E-R, and they, by coincidence, owned the billboard company, a billboard company here in Utah at the same time. So I got a job with them, and I worked with them, and it went well. Then they were sold. And, of course, I was 19
Oh, wow.
and turned 20. So when they came in, the fellow, and I remember his name was Bud Gio, and I later saw him on an elevator once and said he did the greatest favor in the world for me, was firing me. But he felt I was too young,
Okay.
and so he laid me off. So I came out to Utah. I'd been out here for Christmas, so I'd seen it. My father was transferred here to a place called Defense Depot Ogden. He was with the General Service Administration.
Okay.
And so I came out here. And at that time, my recollection is the tuition at Weber was $105 a quarter.
Wow.
So I came up with the plan to start the company, go to Weber. And so I did that. And I'd go to school, and then I'd go out and work on the signs.
Yeah.
And so I started that in March of '65, just right after coming here. First got the land lease agreements printed up and so on.
And then eventually you bought the company that fired you, right?
They sold Salt Lake City to a local company here. The money for it, though, was put up by the Glassman family. They did basically exactly what I ended up doing in 1981.
Okay.
So they hired me, and I went to work for them, and it was very successful. And again, I was just on straight commission. I remember my first month I made in 1966, the month of June, I had made about $1,040 in commissions, and that would be about 10 times that. Today, again, it'd be about $10,000. I ended up having this contract with the Ramada Inn, building other signs and that. And they decided they didn't like me doing that and also working for them. And so then I got fired. The stories go that as I walked out of the door, I swore that I was going to buy the company someday, but I don't think I ever said that.
Definitely sounds better if you did.
Right. But people that were there would say that I said that.
Okay. You don't recall saying it.
I don't think so.
And
I don't think it was that type of an event.
Yeah.
It was,
so the Ramada, the first billboard was before you got hired.
no, it was while I was
Okay.
Yeah,
While you
the
were
first Ramada board probably went up in October, November of '65.
I see.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
And what was your motivation in that where you were talking to the Ramada people, you had the relationship there? Why not just sell it as part of the company you were working for versus on your own?
Well, because I had actually been working on that deal almost from the first day that I started in business.
Okay.
And I had intended to do this with my parents. My primary motivation was to get financial security for my parents. They were living here. They were 56. They had not done well financially in life, and they didn't have a home paid for. They didn't even have a home when I came out here. The case, that was what the underlying thing was, and they had part ownership of the company, which I later, many years later, bought from them and established a retirement and everything for them that way by buying that, an annuity type of structure.
So you get married in December.
Right.
When did you get fired?
I think in February.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long did it take you to buy the company that fired you?
It was 15 years.
And what did those 15 years look like? You and Julia just wheeling and dealing, kind of?
We had 4 children. There are different size signs, so I probably built 60 of the largest size signs. I built about 300 of the medium size signs, which we call 30 sheets. They're the 12 by 24s. And built almost 400 of the smaller signs called the 8 sheet. So that's what I did, and I was just able to get people to lend me money.
Yeah.
Never had any outside equity. Always just did it, and probably my growth could have been faster probably had I taken it outside equity, but it didn't have it. So it's just
just friends and family. Hey,
right.
Fund this Billboard, then that would pay off.
And I got admitted to law school in the spring of '68, and our first child was born in January of '69. Interestingly enough, is I didn't know what I was going to do in, say, October, November. I had never requested a draft deferment, so I went down. I was thinking of the Marines had a program where you could, if you joined the Marines, you wanted to go to law school, you'd defer your entry and then go to law school.
Okay.
I took the test to go to the service academies. I remember being in that room taking the test. There were like 60 kids in there, and they were all talking about their grade point averages and other things. And before I went in for the test, I spoke to the Marine recruiter about joining the Marines and getting in what they called the PLC program, where they paid for law school after you finished your boot camp in Quantico, Virginia. I remember asking him, I said, what if I flunk out of law school? He says, you'll probably be a machine gunner in Vietnam in about a month.
Wow.
Anyway, I said, that's a lot of motivation to study that. I took the test, and for some reason, Lawrence Burton gave me a congressional appointment to go to the United States Naval Academy and/or Kings Point. I didn't know, however, that I'd been accepted to Annapolis until 7 days after Julia and I were married.
Wow.
I got my notice to report for my physical. But I called him up and they said, no, you can't come if you're married.
Oh, okay.
So,
So that worked out.
yeah.
Wow.
I mean, life was just kind of loose because you didn't,
Yeah.
I just was building these signs and doing all the sweat labor myself. My father, then as the company grew and after I got out of law school,
You ended up going to the U.
I ended up going to the U, got accepted there, and went through in 2.5 years, 27 months. And then I took the bar exam in January, but I had the business all the time.
Yeah.
All the time was operating a business. I'd get up on Saturday morning and go down at 5 o'clock in the morning on Saturdays and mix up the paste and I'd hire a lot of people. What's interesting, the ones I would hire a lot of times were music majors because they had they had trouble getting jobs, but you could teach them how to post a billboard, and they were very reliable.
Yeah,
because that's
we heard the same thing from Queen of Raps, if you know them. They said a lot of music majors,
fine arts majors. It was interesting. They were just very and so I had the signs and I did it.
Okay.
And I remember. I think I did 30,000 in revenue that year or the next year, and made about $12,000, 35% margin on it.
Wow. And what was Julia's role during those first
Julia
15
was
years?
working on her PhD.
Okay.
She had been waitlisted for medical school, which in those days they openly discriminated against women, and they could do that then. And so she was working on her PhD and actually taught in the medical school during part of the time. So she did that, and we had 2 of the children, Dewey and Francis, who are now 55 and 56, my first year and second year in law school, and while she was working on her PhD. So when people complain about not having enough time to do things nowadays, I remember we studied all the time. Yeah. And then, but Friday night was our date night. We do that.
And then 1980 was kind of the first big move you made in taking on outside capital.
What happened is I grew the business, so we were making about $500,000 a year. the billings were up, doing well. I'd gained about 40% of the market share.
Wow.
If there was a 10 million of volume, I'll just use this as an example. And for this market, Galaxy had 6 million of it, and I had 4 million of it. I'm just using that as an example.
Sure.
Back in there. I don't remember what the exact numbers were then, but
Yeah.
they had a program a fellow by the name of Brian Swinton I had been friendly with. He started Sweetwater and all the Sweetwater companies that came out.
Yeah.
And he and I had hooked up and gotten friendly. And I was in Boston visiting a client or something, and I gave him a call, and he had gone back to the Harvard Business School to finish his MBA. He took me over to the admissions office and introduced me to some friends of his and also some of the programs there. And so the Harvard Business School had a program today it's called OPM, Owner, President, Manager. And if you had been in business for 10 years, you could apply to this. It's basically a short form MBA.
Okay.
So I got admitted to it. And so I went 78, 79, 80 for 6 weeks each time. And then they gave you a degree from the Harvard Business School.
Wow.
I remember the dean was Foraker at the time. And so in 1980, I got my degree from the Harvard Business School. It's hanging on the wall in there. And through that process, I met one of the teachers had gotten involved with a radio station group out of Detroit, told me that he had had this line of credit that he'd gotten for acquisitions at Continental Bank of Illinois. When I finished that year, and the term, they joke about this, that after the graduates get out of this program, they become entrepreneurs in heat. And so I went and talked to this bank in Chicago, and they got excited about it. And then I had heard that the Glassman Hatch people were getting unhappy with the management that was in place at Galaxy. And so I contacted them and ultimately worked out a deal to buy it.
Wow.
And I borrowed $7 million at 21% interest on July 23rd, 1981.
Wow.
My interest payment was 25% of my revenue at the time after we closed it.
Wow.
Each month, 25% of the revenue went to interest.
How did that conversation go over with Julia?
Oh, she was very supportive of it.
Wow.
Always had been.
Wow.
And by then we had 4 children. We had Billy, who runs Texas and Tennessee and New Mexico and Austin, Texas, headquartered there. He was born in 75, and so he was 6 years old. And Brian, who is deceased, who was killed in an automobile accident in 2007, was born in 79. And I remember I had just gotten over building a new home in Federal Heights that the contractor went broke, filed bankruptcy halfway through the process of building the home, and I had to finish it myself.
Wow.
So it was just, it wasn't that we weren't busy every minute.
Like it seems like you were a natural born salesman. You just kind of talk about those first 15 years like, yeah, we just sold, we just kept building. But those were your first 15 years. You've been in business 60 years now.
Right.
What 3 things would you share with the rising generation of entrepreneurs and salesmen and saleswomen that want to learn how to build something that's going to last like you've built at Reagan?
Well, first of all, don't let yourself get distracted. I always toyed, I was lucky, I always toyed with buying a radio station here and had a couple of deals that came close, and that was a blessing that I didn't.
Okay.
And just stayed focused on the business that I was in, that I knew and knew how to operate. Truthfully, we never lived large, really, in the sense of needing things. I did have a jet when I did my first big LBO in 1978. After Harvard, I got into an organization called Young Presidents Organization, and that developed a network of friends. And I think stay focused and also be committed, have deep purpose. In other words, realize what you want to do. Now, it is very important that you survey the competitive environment of the business that you go into. And I think it's very important, especially if you're small and in other words, you protect yourself. So you want to try to pick an industry truthfully, that the market entrance is difficult. In other words, that you get some kind of a franchise. That's why I went to law school. My father-in-law had gotten. I spoke to him about whether I should go to an MBA or go to law school, and he said, "Well, MBAs are okay, but you go to law school, you get a union card." He had been head of the ENT department at the University of Utah and had resigned, just recently resigned. And he says, "I left the U, and in 1 week I was in the 50% tax bracket." He says, "Because I'm a physician.
Yeah.
I have a union card." So that's one of the reasons I went to law school, is that it was more dear as far as availability of the education.
Yeah.
It was very hard to get in law. So that was the real peak of everybody wanting to be a lawyer, starting with 68.
Got it. Yeah, the barrier to entry.
So barrier to entry, stay focused, have a deep purpose, and patience. In other words, I waited a long time.
Yeah.
I
Just kind of been plodding along for
Right.
60 years.
And then the first one, then in 78, I was able to hook up with this fellow, and I bought a company that is named Rollins, and we put together $100 million. And
That was in 78 or?
no, 88. And then bought other companies in between, and out of that one, we spun off things. I mean, so you just start doing things.
Yeah.
Deals.
And what was your pitch at the beginning? Like, how did you sell a billboard, and how has that evolved over the time?
Selling a billboard, what I determined was that the interstate system had come through, and my competitor had let their capacity dramatically shrink. So there was and we were getting calls before I started the 30-sheet billboards, which they had all the 30-sheet billboards at the time. How I would sell a billboard just is basically of going out and explain to someone, there's two places to advertise, in the home, out of the home, and what are the benefits of the reach and frequency and other things. I was always pretty quantitative in coming up with what the audience delivery was. We would do what we'd call origin studies. We'd take license plate numbers. You can't do that today because of that one bill that got passed. But with those days, you could just get everybody's license plate that drove by a certain location, and then you'd do a spotted map.
Oh, wow.
And then you'd take the spotted map and show on the spotted map that it basically become complete by having 10 or 15 billboards up. You'd reach everybody eventually.
Wow.
And in those days, you could get, actually where the cars were registered. So those were some of the ways that we did it.
And did Julia first work in the business with
Never
you?
did.
Did she ever go to med school?
No, she just got her PhD, and then she just became a very active in charity work and boards and things like that.
Wow.
And stayed at home, and then she was always my traveling companion.
Okay.
I've flown over 5, besides having a couple, 2, 3 jets when I had the companies all across the country. I flew a lot, and she just always come with me. So it had been difficult for her to work.
Got it.
And I have over 5 million miles on Delta.
Wow.
And she had almost 4.
Wow.
So that's how much she traveled with
She'd
me.
come with you.
So she was always there as my supporter and my advisor.
And tell us about the memorial campaign that you did with all of these billboards. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but assume someone doesn't know why you did it, how you did it, and how it came about.
Through the years, we've started putting up memorials for people. For instance, George Hatch, who was the one that basically owned the engineer that I bought the company when he passed away.
Okay.
We put up 10 billboards for him. Mm-hmm. But it was more of a case of my love for her. It struck me that she had been there while all this company has operated for 58 years of it. I actually filed my articles of incorporation. My wife was Jewish, and I was Catholic, and we met at a Jewish party. And when we got married the first time on Christmas, the 26th of December, immediately her mother wanted us to be married by a rabbi. Mm-hmm. And I literally filed our articles of incorporation, which I just, fledgling lawyer before I was a lawyer, went and found another billboard company's articles and just copied them.
Okay.
And paid the filing fee of $50 instead of, those days lawyers charged you $1,000 of that. I literally filed them at the Secretary of State's office as we were driving to her parents' home for our second wedding. So we had 2 weddings. We got married on the 29th of December by a rabbi that they had flown in from New York City at their home at 2066 Hubbard Avenue.
Wow.
So she's just always, I was 20 years old. I actually lied about my age when we got married in Reno. And so I was 20 years old when we got married.
You haven't really known life without her.
Never. Really. High school and that, but I've only ever, the longest I had ever lived alone, not with a roommate or with my parents, was 3 months before she died.
Wow.
The 3 months after I got out of high school, I house sat for them in Norwalk, Ohio, because my father had been transferred to another base in Dayton, which was 185 miles away.
Wow.
And so she, what I wanted to do is that because she'd always been part of it, I mean, when I'd be building the signs in the summertime, she'd bring my lunch out to me. Like in the Midwest, the women would do the farmers in the field. And because the farms were not so large because they had much higher yield. So it's always been there.
Yeah.
So this was a way to have her a little longer. So, but they'll come down now. I figure it'll go 1 year, and she died on June 12th of 2025, and so we'll start taking them down after June 12th or June 15th. But then I'll put them back up each year on May 15th before Memorial Day, and take them down on June 15th.
Beautiful.
3 days after her date.
And these billboards that you have her on, there's over 300 across the country,
Yes,
right?
yes.
How much revenue is that costing you to have her instead of a client on there?
I haven't even attempted to think about that.
Wow.
You always have some boards vacant, so that I wouldn't say that's there, but it just is not.
It's not on your radar.
Didn't even isn't even a concern.
That's amazing.
We do fine, and so it's not really caused us any problem, and it's been very, very well received.
100%.
Yeah.
Everyone, all our listeners said to tell you that they love Julia, and they love the legacy that you've brought for her. It's amazing.
Right, and she bore 4 children that we had, and, but grief is hard. But you have to move on because grief never goes away. The grief that I suffer from our son that we lost it never really goes away. It somewhat diminishes, but it kind of spikes up just out of the blue, and that's life. That's living. So.
Probably in the moments when you'd want her there the most, right?
It's always unexpected.
Well, what an amazing love story and love letter that you wrote to her with the billboards. It's amazing. Any last words you'd love to leave with people listening?
I thank the viewers for enjoying Julia and for causing that for you to come here and do this interview. It's very kind of you, and it kind of is a lovely blessing on her that you've done this.
Absolutely. We're so grateful to have been here today, and thanks for your time.
All right. Thank you, Keaton.
Thanks for listening to this episode of UtahPreneur with Bill Reagan of Reagan Outdoor Advertising. If his story inspired you like it inspired me, please send it to a friend. And do not for the life of you miss last week's episode with Mark and Sally Dietline of Hale Center Theater. They have an amazing story of building a powerhouse, world-class theater right here in Utah. And as always, follow us on social media wherever you like to get your content. Links are always below in the description. See you next week.